Hello, everyone! Today we're going to dive into a story that begins in the most ordinary way, yet quickly spirals into something no one could imagine. Picture this. A quiet Tuesday morning, sunlight stretching across the kitchen table. The same table where family breakfasts once filled the air with laughter. But today, instead of laughter, there's a single letter lying open, its words as heavy as lead. It isn't just paper, it's a sentence. The doctor's handwriting, neat but merciless, declares the truth. Cancer, stage 2. Aggressive treatment needed. No time to wait, no room for hesitation. And suddenly, every detail of the morning, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, feels sharper, louder, crueler. I remember gripping the edges of that table as if it might hold me upright when the news itself nearly knocked me to the floor. Survival wasn't just about courage, it was about money. A number written in black ink. $15,000. The exact amount required to start the treatment that could save my life. For years, I had prepared for the unimaginable. After my husband passed away, I tucked away the insurance payout, promising myself that no matter what storms came, I would be ready. And this diagnosis, surely counted as a storm. That money was not luxury. It was not a dream fund, it was a lifeline. But lifelines have a way of slipping, especially when you trust the wrong hands. At that moment, sitting in the stillness of my kitchen, I didn't yet know how betrayal could cut deeper than any illness. I didn't yet know that the very people I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for could become the ones to push me toward the edge of despair. And so, the story begins with urgency, a race against both disease and time. The plan was simple. Call the doctor, schedule the treatment, use the money I had set aside for this very purpose. My heart hurt, yes, but I also felt a small flicker of control. I thought, at least I am prepared. I thought, this is why I saved. I thought, my son will stand with me. But life doesn't always unfold according to the scripts we write in our minds. Sometimes it twists in ways so brutal, so absurd, that you can barely believe you're living through it. And that's exactly what I want to share with you. Because what happened next is not only my story, it's a story about love, trust, family, and the painful truth that sometimes the people closest to you can wound you the most. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and at what time of day? Morning, evening, midnight? I'd love to know how far this story reaches. Because as the clock on my wall ticked that morning, I had no idea how far this story of mine would travel. No idea how the choices of others would strip me bare, test my will, and ultimately reveal truths I never wanted to face. $15,000. That's the number that stood between life and death. That's the number I thought I had. But where did it really go? And why, in the most desperate moment of my life, did my family choose silk and lace over survival? The answers begin now. The fund wasn't just money. It was memory, sacrifice, and quiet preparation for the worst. I had built it over years, little by little, with every deliberate choice to go without something I wanted, so that, if the day ever came, I would be ready. My late husband's life insurance had been the foundation. I remember the night I received the check after his passing, eyes swollen from crying, hands trembling as I signed the papers. It wasn't wealth, it was security. It was meant to keep our family steady if tragedy ever came again. From that day forward, I treated that account like sacred ground. Every deposit was a promise to myself, every balance check a whisper of comfort. You will be safe, you are prepared. I didn't dare touch it for vacations, renovations, or the temptations that so often creep into daily life. Friends bought new cars, went on cruises, celebrated with grand purchases. I quietly smiled, declining invitations, telling myself, not me. Not now. Someday, this will matter more. And it did. $15,000, exactly the amount my doctor had listed in his careful, clinical tone. Not a cent more, not a cent less. I almost laughed at the cruel precision of it. The years of restraint, The lonely decisions to walk past new dresses in shop windows, to patch up the old car one more time instead of replacing it. Suddenly, all of it had a clear purpose. It felt like destiny had acknowledged my discipline and rewarded me. I wasn't rich, but I was ready. I remember calling my son that night, holding the phone with shaking hands. I told him, "Don't worry, I have the money saved. We can begin treatment next week." He sounded relieved, his voice lighter, and I felt an immense wave of maternal pride. Even in this terrifying moment, I could still shield him from the crushing reality of financial burden. I had always been the caretaker, the planner, the one who ensured the family had what it needed. And here I was again, prepared, even against cancer itself. I didn't realize then that the foundation of trust I had placed in my family would betray me. I didn't realize that adding my son's name to that account years ago, such a small, innocent decision, would open the door to a heartbreak far greater than illness. At that moment, all I felt was calm, secure in my foresight, grateful to the man I had buried years before for giving me the means to fight. But as I folded the bank statements neatly back into their envelope and placed them in the drawer, I had no way of knowing that my lifeline had already been cut. That money, the lifeblood I had been clinging to, wasn't mine anymore. It's strange looking back. I can still see the neat line of numbers on the statement, the way my eyes relaxed when I confirmed the balance. $15,347.22. That was my shield. That was the number that let me breathe again after the diagnosis, and that was the number I would cling to in the days that followed, until the moment when the truth would drop like a stone in water, sending ripples through everything I believed about love, loyalty, and family. At that point, I thought the hardest part would be the treatments, the exhaustion, the hair loss, the endless hours in sterile hospital rooms. I thought cancer would be my enemy, but cancer was never the sharpest knife. The betrayal that was already set in motion, the hand that had already reached into my account, would slice far deeper. The day I walked into the bank felt like any other. The glass doors whooshed open, letting in a rush of cold air from the vents above. People stood in line, clutching deposit slips and envelopes, while the soft hum of printers and the low murmur of conversations filled the room. To everyone else, it was a routine stop. For me, it was the beginning of my fight for life. I carried my folder close to my chest. Inside, the doctor's note, the schedule for my upcoming chemotherapy sessions, and the bank statements that always reassured me. I could almost hear my husband's voice in my head. "You planned for this. You'll be okay." The teller smiled as I approached, her tone polite but practiced. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "I just need to confirm my balance," I replied, sliding the card across the counter. My voice was steady, almost casual. After all, I knew what I would see. The safety net I had built, waiting to catch me. Her fingers tapped across the keyboard. The screen reflected faintly in her glasses, green and black numbers flashing. I expected her to nod, to say the amount with that same reassuring tone she had always used before. Instead, her expression shifted. Barely perceptible at first, a flicker of hesitation, the faint tightening of her jaw. "Could you give me a moment?" she asked softly. Something cold began to spread through my chest. I nodded, though my heart had started to thud louder than the tapping of her keys. Seconds stretched into minutes. She typed again, checked another screen, then finally looked back at me with eyes full of something I didn't want to recognize. Pity. "It looks like there was a large withdrawal 3 weeks ago," she said. Her voice carried the careful gentleness of someone delivering bad news, but the words hit like a thunderclap. I frowned. "That's not possible. Could you check again?" She turned the screen toward me, and in that instant, the world tilted. Where $15,000 had always stood like a fortress, now there was barely 300. Numbers I had trusted, numbers I had built my hope upon, were gone, reduced to almost nothing. I gripped the counter to keep myself upright. My knees threatened to buckle, my vision blurring at the edges. The room around me carried on as if nothing had happened. People filling out slips, coins clinking into trays, the faint ring of a phone in the back office. But for me, everything froze. The teller's voice floated toward me again. The authorized person on the account made the transfer. Authorized person. The phrase lodged in my mind like a splinter. Years ago, when my husband passed away, I had added my son to the account. I wanted to make sure he could access the funds if something ever happened to me. It was a gesture of trust, of love, of faith in the boy I had raised. Now that trust had gutted me. I gathered the papers the teller printed for me, each line of transaction history like evidence in a trial I never wanted. My hands shook so violently that the pages rattled. I tucked them into my folder and stumbled toward the exit, the polished floor gleaming mockingly beneath my feet. Outside, the world was bright. Too bright. Cars passed, horns honked, the sky stretched blue and endless. How could the world look so normal when mine had just caved in? I sat in my car, the bank statement spread across the passenger seat like shards of glass. The number burned into my mind, $347.22. That was all that remained of my lifeline. The betrayal hadn't fully registered yet, not logically, but deep in my bones, I knew. Someone I trusted, someone I loved, had chosen to steal my survival. And that kind of wound, deeper than illness, colder than death, was only beginning to bleed. The house was silent when I pulled into the driveway, the folder still pressed tight against my chest like a shield. Inside, the air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves knew what was about to unfold. I stepped into the living room, and there they were. My son sat on the couch, leaning close to Milani. Ivory wedding invitations were scattered across the coffee table, their gold lettering catching the afternoon light like tiny sparks of triumph. She was radiant, her manicured fingers brushing delicately against one of the cards as if each guest's name was a jewel. My son looked up when he saw me, his face flushing, caught off guard. "Mom, I didn't expect you back so soon," he said quickly, rising to his feet. Milani lifted her eyes from the invitations, her smile slow and deliberate. "Hi, Geneva," she said, her tone sweet, almost playful, as though nothing could possibly be wrong. I set my purse down carefully, the papers inside rustling like restless ghosts. "David," I said evenly, "I need to talk to you." Alone. He hesitated, glancing at Milani before shaking his head. "We don't keep secrets from each other. Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of her." My stomach clenched. The son I had raised, my boy who once clutched my hand crossing the street, who once cried when his father died, now standing with her, not me. I drew the bank statements from my folder, the pages trembling in my grip. "The money's gone," I said flatly. David's face went pale. His lips parted, but no words came. Milani's expression didn't falter. She simply crossed her legs and leaned back into the couch, her eyes glittering with something I couldn't name. Calm? Confidence? Victory? "What money?" David finally asked. Though we both knew. I spread the papers out on the table, covering their wedding invitations with the cold, hard evidence of betrayal. $15,000, my medical fund, the money for my cancer treatment. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the creak of the ceiling fan above. My heart pounded so loudly, I wondered if they could hear it too. David finally broke the silence. "Mom, I can explain." "Please do," I whispered. Milani leaned forward now, her voice smooth as silk. "Geneva, we borrowed the money, just temporarily, for the wedding. You'll get your treatment." "Borrowed?" My voice cracked. "I'm supposed to start chemotherapy next week, without it." "You'll figure something out," David interrupted, his tone desperate. He ran his hands through his hair. "Mom, please, you'll find a way. But Milani, she only gets married once. This is her dream. Her dream." I stared at him, waiting for the son I knew to resurface, waiting for him to see the insanity of what he was saying. Instead, Milani smiled faintly, tilting her head. You're 63, Geneva. I'm 26. Who deserves the money more? The words cut like knives. I waited for David to correct her, to defend me, to stand up against the cruelty of that question. But he didn't. He sighed, defeated. The deposits are already paid. The venue is booked. We can't undo it now. I stood there, my chest tight, my lungs refusing to fill. The room that had once been my sanctuary, where family dinners had been shared, where my husband's laughter had once rung out, now felt like a battlefield. They sat together, side by side, their hands brushing over embossed invitations while my life unraveled before me. My son, the boy I raised, had chosen flowers and champagne over my survival. I turned away, the bank statement still clutched in my hands, and for the first time, I understood. Cancer wasn't the only fight I had ahead of me. The deeper battle would be here, in my own living room, against the people I thought loved me most. Milani was beautiful. There was no denying that. The kind of beauty that turned heads when she entered a room. Her glossy black hair framed her face like a curtain. Her green eyes seemed to sparkle, as though they were always in on some private joke, and her smile, oh, that smile, was crafted to disarm. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect bride, glowing with youth and charm. But to me, that smile had already begun to feel like a mask, hiding something sharp and calculating beneath. As she leaned back on my couch, legs crossed with elegance, I studied her the way you might study a dangerous animal, striking, mesmerizing, and unpredictable. She had the composure of someone who never doubted she would get what she wanted. Even in the face of my trembling hands and the evidence spread across the table, she didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, watching me with that steady, confident gaze. I don't know why you're so upset, Geneva, she said finally, her voice syrupy, almost condescending. It's not like the money is gone forever. We'll pay you back. The words dripped into the silence, smooth and poisonous. Pay me back? How could one repay stolen time, stolen health? Did she think chemotherapy could be delayed like a bill, postponed until it was convenient? Her fingers brushed across one of the wedding invitations that lay beneath my bank statements. She lifted it delicately, as though the embossed lettering meant more to her than the stark numbers on the page. Besides, she added, her tone softening into a mockery of compassion, this is about love. Isn't that what your husband would have wanted? For his son to have his dream wedding? For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. She had invoked his memory, my husband, the man who had left us the insurance money that built this fund in the first place. She used his absence as a weapon, twisting his legacy to justify her theft. My stomach knotted, and I pressed my hand against the table to steady myself. I glanced at David, silently begging him to hear the cruelty in her words, to see the manipulation for what it was. But his eyes were locked on her, not me. Every flicker of doubt on his face vanished the moment she spoke, soothed away by her practiced tone and that unshakable smile. Milani was no longer just my daughter-in-law. She was the storm that had blown into our family, the one rewriting our history and claiming control. In that moment, I saw her clearly. A woman who valued appearances above life itself, who could rationalize anything as long as it led her closer to what she wanted. The scariest part wasn't her boldness, it was her calmness. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't show anger. She didn't need to. Her power came from certainty, from the way she made outrageous words sound almost reasonable. That kind of control was far more dangerous than rage. Think about it, she continued, her voice lilting, her eyes never leaving mine. What's more memorable, chemotherapy sessions or a wedding day? My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to shatter the mask she wore, to remind her that this wasn't a trade between celebration and survival. It was life itself. But when I looked at my son, I saw hesitation written all over his face, and I knew her voice had already seeped into his thoughts, reshaping his loyalty. That was when I realized Milani wasn't just taking money. She was taking my son piece by piece, pulling him into her orbit until he belonged more to her than to me. And she was doing it with a smile so polished, so rehearsed, that anyone outside this room would call her radiant. But I knew better. I saw what lay beneath. She wasn't the bride of my son's dreams. She was the thief of my life. There comes a moment in every family where silence speaks louder than any word. That night, standing in my own living room, I learned just how deafening silence can be. David stood between us, his mother on one side, the woman he had vowed to spend his life with on the other. His shoulders were tense, his face pale, as though his body already knew the weight of the choice he was about to make. I could see the boy I had raised flickering in his eyes, the son who once clung to me during thunderstorms, who once promised to take care of me when I grew old. For a fleeting second, I believed he would turn to me, that he would see through Milani's honeyed words and remember who had always been in his corner. But then Milani placed a hand gently on his arm. Just one touch. It was subtle, almost tender, yet it anchored him to her side more firmly than any chain. "David," I whispered, my voice breaking, "you know that money was for my treatment. Without it, I can't start chemo." He looked at me, his lips trembling as though the right words were tangled in his throat. But before he could speak, Milani leaned closer to him, her eyes never leaving mine. "She'll be fine," she said softly, as if soothing a child. "She's strong. She always figures things out. But this is our one chance. Don't let anyone take it away from us." Our one chance. As though my life was just an obstacle in the path of her dream. I waited, breath held, for my son to push her hand away, to defend me. But instead, he nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Mom," he began, his voice low and unsteady. "I know this isn't fair, but the deposits are paid. The vendors are expecting us. We can't undo it now." His words hung in the air like smoke, choking me. I felt the ground tilt beneath me, my heart tearing with every syllable. "You're choosing her," I said, the realization slicing through me. He flinched, but he didn't deny it. I could see the battle raging inside him, the guilt, the shame, the love he still carried for me. But it wasn't enough. Milani had wrapped him so tightly in her web that even his conscience couldn't pull him free. "She deserves her wedding," he murmured. "And I deserve my life," I snapped, louder now, the desperation cracking open in my chest. "Do you hear yourself, David? You're trading my survival for flowers and photographs." The words struck him, but instead of breaking through, they only deepened his conflict. He rubbed his temples, his voice tight with frustration. "Mom, please don't make me choose." But the truth was, he already had. Milani smiled faintly, her fingers still resting on his arm like a victor's claim. Her silence was louder than any gloating. She didn't need to argue anymore. She had won. The room felt colder then, emptier, as if years of love and sacrifice had evaporated in an instant. I saw my son not as the child I once rocked to sleep, but as a man who had abandoned me for the promise of a perfect wedding day. I turned toward the door, my body heavy with grief. The bank statement still crumpled in my fist felt useless now, like scraps of paper, with no power to change what had already been decided. Behind me, I heard Milani whisper something to him, her tone soft, victorious. I didn't catch the words, but I didn't need to. The message was clear. I was alone in this fight. The next morning, I stood at my driveway, staring at the car that had carried me through countless chapters of my life. It wasn't glamorous. A practical 2018 Honda, steady and reliable, the kind of car my husband would have approved of. I had imagined it would be with me for many more years, a quiet companion for grocery runs and doctor's appointments. But survival doesn't ask about sentiment. Survival demands sacrifice. A young couple arrived, their baby bundled in the back seat of their older, sputtering car. They looked at my Honda the way I once looked at my late husband, like it was salvation. I handed over the keys with trembling hands, forcing a smile as they counted out the cash. Their joy stung, not because I begrudged them, but because it reminded me of everything I was losing. I watched from the window as they drove away, my car disappearing down the street like another piece of my security, gone forever. Inside my hand was a small envelope stuffed with bills. Not enough to rebuild my account, not enough to cover everything, but enough to buy me time. Time, that's all I wanted. When the first day of chemotherapy came, I tied a scarf around my head, though I hadn't lost my hair yet. It was less about hiding and more about bracing myself, preparing for the image in the mirror I knew would eventually stare back. At the bus stop, I stood among strangers, clutching a canvas tote bag filled with snacks, water, and the thick packet of medical forms that now defined my life. The bus rumbled up, its doors opening with a hiss, and I stepped inside. It was crowded, noisy, ordinary. But to me, it felt surreal. Each bump in the road jolted through my bones, reminding me of the car I had sold, the comfort I had traded for survival. I sat by the window, watching familiar streets blur past, places where I had once driven with my son beside me, laughing about small things. Now those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and despair. Rows of chairs lined the treatment room, each occupied by someone clutching their own lifeline, IV bags swaying above us like silent sentinels. I lowered myself into a chair, my hands cold, my heart pounding. A nurse greeted me with practiced kindness, inserting the needle with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. As the medicine began to drip into my veins, I closed my eyes. I wanted to think of something beautiful, something comforting, but instead, I saw the gold-embossed invitations on my coffee table, the glint in Milani's eyes, the way my son's shoulders slumped as he chose her over me. The poison in my blood wasn't just the chemotherapy, it was betrayal. Day after day, treatment after treatment, I followed the same routine. Wake up, tie the scarf, walk to the bus stop, sit among strangers, pretend not to notice when my body grew weaker, when my reflection grew paler. I smiled at neighbors who asked how I was doing, answering with the same lie. I'm managing. Managing. What a hollow word. Because while the medicine fought the disease inside me, I fought another illness, the loneliness of being abandoned by the one person I had trusted most. Each time the bus rattled past a bridal shop, its windows filled with gowns shimmering under soft lights, I felt the sting of irony. Somewhere in those racks hung the dress my son's bride had chosen, a dress paid for with my survival. But still, I endured. I held my head high as much as I could, because to give in completely would mean she had already won. And though cancer had weakened my body, betrayal had carved into my heart, I clung stubbornly to one fragile hope. Somehow, someway, I would find a way through this storm. Even if it meant walking every step of the journey alone. It was a gray afternoon, the kind where clouds pressed low against the windows of the clinic, and the air smelled faintly of rain. I sat in the treatment chair, the IV needle taped firmly to my arm, watching the steady drip of chemicals slide into my veins. The room hummed with the quiet suffering of patients, soft coughs, the rustle of blankets, the squeak of nurses' shoes across linoleum. I tried to distract myself, reading a book with words that blurred more often than not. That's when I heard her voice, clear, unmistakable, drifting from the waiting area just beyond the partition. Milani. Her tone was light, conversational, but every word sank like a stone. "Oh, it's been so stressful," she said, her voice carrying just enough to slice through the background noise. "David's mom keeps making everything about her. She's going through some health stuff, and she's just so demanding." My chest tightened. Demanding? I was sitting here with poison coursing through my veins, fighting to keep breathing each day, and she painted me as some inconvenience, an obstacle in the way of her perfect wedding. Another voice murmured something in response. I couldn't make out the words, but Milani laughed softly, the kind of laugh people use when they want to sound charming while dismissing someone else's pain. She acts like she's the only person in the world who's ever been sick. Honestly, it's exhausting. I keep telling David this wedding is supposed to be about joy, not her drama. The book slipped from my hands, landing open on my lap. My throat burned, not just from anger, but from humiliation. She was speaking about me as though I were nothing more than a nuisance, a character flaw, rather than a mother and a patient fighting for her life. I didn't move, afraid that if I stood, if I confronted her right there, I would collapse under the weight of it all. Instead, I sat still, letting the IV drip, 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 each drop echoing the growing rage inside me. When my session ended, I gathered my things quietly, scarf wrapped tightly around my head, trying to disguise both my thinning hair and the shame pressed deep into my chest. As I stepped into the waiting area, Milani was gone. Only the faint smell of her perfume lingered in the air, floral and sharp, like a thorn hidden beneath petals. I thought that would be the end of it. A cruel remark overheard, another wound to carry, but fate has a way of opening doors when you least expect it. A week later, at the same clinic, a woman approached me as I flipped through a magazine in the waiting room. She wore scrubs and a nurse's badge clipped to her chest, her smile cautious but kind. "Are you Geneva Hartford?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, surprised. I think I know your daughter-in-law." Her name was Nancy, a nurse who had worked at a hospital in another state before moving here. She glanced around, lowering her voice. "I don't want to overstep, but I've seen her before. Milani. She was married to one of my patients, a man with cancer." The room seemed to tilt again, my pulse thudding in my ears. Married? Another patient? Nancy's expression was grave. He didn't survive. And when the money was gone, so was she. The air left my lungs in a rush. A chill crawled down my spine as Nancy's words took root, planting a seed of suspicion darker than anything I had imagined. Maybe Milani wasn't just selfish. Maybe she was something else entirely, something dangerous. The decision to hire an investigator wasn't simple. I stared at Nancy's words scribbled on a scrap of paper for days, wondering if grief and sickness were making me paranoid. But each time I remembered Milani's laugh in the clinic, each time I saw my son's blind devotion, the seed of suspicion twisted tighter. I needed proof, something undeniable, something that could shatter the mask she wore so perfectly. That's how I found myself climbing a narrow staircase in a quiet part of town, the hum of traffic fading as I reached a small office with frosted glass on the door. Marcus Webb, Private Investigations. Inside, the air was thick with the faint smell of coffee gone cold. The blinds were half drawn, casting slatted shadows across the desk, where stacks of folders sat in uneven towers. A single lamp glowed on the corner, its yellow light turning the room into a scene from an old noir film. Marcus Webb himself was nothing like I expected. No flashy suit, no dramatic flair. Just a man in his 50s with kind but tired eyes, a loosened tie, and the air of someone who had seen more than he cared to. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Have a seat, Mrs. Hartford. Tell me what you're looking for." My voice shook as I slid an envelope across his desk, the money I had scraped together from selling my grandmother's china set. "I need to know who my daughter-in-law really is." He leaned back, fingers steepled, studying me with quiet intensity. "That's a big question. What makes you suspicious?" I told him everything. The missing money, the overheard conversation, Nancy's warning about another husband with cancer. With each detail, Marcus's expression tightened, though he never interrupted. When I finished, the silence stretched long enough for me to hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. Finally, he nodded. "I've seen patterns like this before. People who move from place to place, weaving stories, preying on the vulnerable. If what your nurse friend said is true, your daughter-in-law may not just be selfish. She may be a predator." The word hit me like ice water. Predator. Marcus opened a fresh folder and scribbled notes in neat block letters. "Here's what I can do. I'll run background checks in multiple states, trace marriage records, financial documents, even obituaries if necessary. It won't be fast, and it won't be cheap. But if there's a pattern, we'll find it. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of control returned to me. Do it, I whispered. Days blurred into nights as I waited. Chemotherapy drained me, each session leaving me weaker. But the thought of Marcus digging into Milani's past gave me a strange strength. I pictured him combing through courthouse archives, piecing together fragments of lives she had left behind, pulling threads from the tapestry she had woven so carefully. When he finally called, his voice was grim. I think you'd better come down here. Back in his dimly lit office, Marcus laid out a stack of documents across the desk, like cards in a losing hand. Marriage certificates, divorce filings, hospital records, photographs clipped to reports. She's had at least 4 husbands before your son, Marcus said quietly. Every one of them sick. Every one of them with money. My breath caught. 4? He tapped one folder. Trevor Collins, diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma. Died 6 weeks after she filed for divorce. Another tap. Robert Martinez, lung cancer, wealthy family. She cleaned out his accounts before he passed. Tap. Frank Morrison, prostate cancer. He caught on before she could finish him. Hired me, actually, to confirm his suspicions. That's how I recognized her face in your description. Each name was a nail hammered into the coffin of my remaining trust. I stared at the evidence, the neat black ink spelling out a story so much darker than I ever imagined. She's not just reckless, Mrs. Hartford, Marcus said softly. She's calculated, and if your son is her next husband, he may also be her next victim. The room spun. My hands pressed against the table to steady myself, but no amount of pressure could stop the truth from crashing down. Milani wasn't merely selfish. She wasn't merely ambitious. She was a predator, and she had set her sights on my son. I waited until evening, the city lights already glowing against the windows of my son's apartment. I carried the folder like it was a weapon and a wound all at once, evidence gathered by Marcus Webb, the truth heavy enough to crush me. When David opened the door, his face softened for just a moment, the way it always did when he saw me. But behind him, Milani's voice floated from the kitchen, cheerful, humming as if the world was hers. Can we talk? I asked. My voice was steady, but my hands shook. David nodded and let me in. The apartment smelled of pasta sauce, warm and domestic, a cruel contrast to what I held in my arms. I sat at the table where just months ago I had shared Sunday dinners with them. Now it felt like a stage for a confrontation no family should ever face. I placed the folder on the table and slowly opened it. One by one, I spread out the documents. Marriage certificates, divorce filings, copies of medical records, photographs of Milani with men I had never seen before, men who had all been sick, men who were all gone. David's eyes darted across the papers, confusion clouding his face. What is this? He asked, his voice sharp with defensiveness. This, I said softly, is your wife's past. 4 husbands before you, all sick, all wealthy, all ruined. He shook his head immediately, pushing the papers back toward me, as though touching them might burn him. No, Mom, this isn't real. You've let this paranoia get inside your head. It's not paranoia, I insisted, my voice trembling but firm. I pushed the photographs toward him, forcing him to look. This is Trevor Collins, Robert Martinez, Frank Morrison, men who thought they were loved, men who thought they were safe, until Milani left them with nothing. He pressed his palms to his temples, as if he could block out my words by sheer force. You don't know her like I do. The door to the kitchen creaked. Milani appeared, wiping her hands on a towel, her smile soft, calculated. What's going on? She asked, her eyes flicking to the spread of documents. David looked at her, then back at me, torn between 2 worlds. She's saying you've been married before, that you've... His voice cracked. That you've done terrible things. Milani's expression didn't falter. She crossed the room slowly, her heels tapping against the floor, and picked up one of the marriage certificates as though it were nothing more than a grocery receipt. This is ridiculous, she said calmly. Geneva, I understand you're scared. I understand you're sick. But making up stories to destroy my marriage? That's cruel. Stories, I snapped, my heart hammering. These are legal records, public documents, facts, Milani. She met my gaze, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Or forgeries. How much did you pay that investigator to create these lies? Because that's what this is. Lies, designed to turn my husband against me. I turned to David, desperate. Son, look at me. Do you think I would spend my last savings on lies? Do you think I would risk everything, my dignity, my health, just to fabricate a story? But I could already see it in his eyes. Doubt. Not in her, but in me. Milani slipped her hand into his, her voice dropping to a soothing murmur. She's confused, David. She's been under so much stress. Chemotherapy. It takes a toll. We have to be compassionate. Compassion. The word twisted like a knife. She wasn't just rewriting the past. She was rewriting the present, painting me as a delusional, bitter woman instead of a mother fighting for her son's safety. David squeezed her hand, his face pale, torn, but leaning toward her side. Mom, maybe you're mistaken. Maybe you're remembering wrong. The papers lay scattered between us, undeniable proof reduced to scraps of doubt under the weight of her voice. For the first time, I understood that truth alone isn't always enough, not when the heart chooses to believe a lie. The hardest part about gaslighting isn't the lie itself. It's the way the lie creeps into the cracks of your mind, whispering doubts until you don't know which way is up anymore. And Milani was a master at it. In the days after I laid out the evidence, David grew distant. Phone calls became shorter, excuses piled higher. And when he did speak to me, his words felt rehearsed, as if they weren't his own, but borrowed straight from her mouth. She thinks you're under a lot of stress, Mom, he said one evening over the phone, his voice flat. Maybe it's the treatments. Maybe they're making you see things differently. I gripped the receiver so tightly, my knuckles whitened. David, I showed you the documents. Marriage certificates, divorce records, medical files. How can you dismiss that as stress? There was a pause, the silence on the line heavy and suffocating. Then, almost reluctantly, he whispered, Milani says anyone can fake papers these days. She says you've always been dramatic when you're upset. Maybe you're just... His voice faltered. Maybe you're remembering wrong. Remembering wrong. The phrase clawed at me, as if my grief, my illness, my exhaustion had clouded my mind so much that I had invented an entire history out of thin air. At night, lying awake in the dim glow of the street lamp outside my window, I replayed his words again and again. Doubt trickled in like water under a locked door. What if I was imagining things? What if I was being unfair? The documents were real, but the way he looked at me, the pity, the frustration, it made me feel like I was the one unraveling. Milani's tactics were subtle, but brutal. She didn't shout, didn't accuse me outright. Instead, she tilted her head with practiced sympathy, her tone always soft. I know you're scared, Geneva. I know this is hard for you, but lashing out at me isn't going to cure your cancer. Those words sank deep, leaving wounds invisible to anyone else. And when she spoke them in front of David, he absorbed them like gospel. I could see it in the way he glanced at me, torn between love and suspicion, his faith in me crumbling under her steady hand. One evening, I tried again. David, think about it. Why would I invent this? Why would I spend my last dollars hiring someone just to smear Milani? What possible reason would I have? He hesitated, eyes flicking away. Maybe because you don't like her. Maybe because you feel replaced. The word cut deeper than any scalpel. Replaced. That was the story she had fed him. The jealous mother, unwilling to let go of her son, so desperate she invented elaborate tales to ruin his marriage. It was a role I never auditioned for, yet she had cast me in it flawlessly. The worst part? It was working. I saw it in his posture, in the way he leaned toward her and away from me, in the way his voice softened when he repeated her lines. She had wrapped herself around his heart, weaving her narrative until my truth sounded like delusions. I wasn't just losing the money. I wasn't just losing my health. I was losing my son, piece by piece, memory by memory, as she rewrote the script of our family. Milani didn't need to scream or threaten. Her power lay in the quiet erosion of certainty, the gentle drip of poison into conversations until trust itself dissolved. And as much as I clung to the documents, to Marcus's words, to Nancy's warnings, I realized something terrifying. If she could make my son question me, then what else could she make him believe? I wasn't just battling cancer anymore. I was battling invisibility, being erased from my own story by the very woman who had stolen my lifeline. The wedding day arrived with the kind of splendor that people dream about, the kind of event that ends up in glossy magazines. The Riverside Country Club was drenched in sunlight, its manicured gardens bursting with white roses and twinkling fairy lights strung across archways. Guests in crisp suits and flowing gowns mingled across the lawn, glasses of champagne glinting in their hands. Laughter floated through the air like music. I walked slowly down the stone path, my navy dress neat but modest, the pearl earrings my husband once gave me dangling like small anchors of memory. My scarf was tied carefully, hiding what the chemotherapy had already taken, but I could feel the weight of eyes lingering on me, curious, pitying, judging. To them, I wasn't the proud mother of the groom. I was an afterthought, a shadow at the edge of the light. From a distance, I saw David. He looked handsome in his black tuxedo, his shoulders squared, his smile practiced. But I knew that smile. I had raised him. I could tell when it didn't reach his eyes. Still, he stood tall beside Milani, and she glowed like a queen. Her gown was an ocean of silk and lace, flowing around her like mist. Every detail screamed extravagance, the delicate embroidery, the jeweled hairpiece, the cascading bouquet of orchids that must have cost more than a month of my treatments. And all of it, every flower, every candle, every glass of champagne, was bought with my life. Guests whispered about how radiant she looked, how perfect the day was, how lucky my son was to have found her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab them by the shoulders and shout, "Don't you see? Don't you see what she really is?" But their eyes were filled with admiration, and their laughter drowned out my silence. When the ceremony began, I sat alone in the second row. Not the front. Milani's family had claimed those seats. I was placed like a distant relative, close enough to witness, far enough to be invisible. As the music swelled and she walked down the aisle, everyone rose to their feet in awe. I stayed seated, my legs too heavy, my heart too fractured. The vows were worse than I imagined. David's voice shook as he promised to cherish her, to protect her, to stand by her through sickness and health. Each word felt like a betrayal, an echo of promises he should have remembered making to me, not in vows, but in the countless ways a child clings to a parent. Now those promises were redirected, swallowed whole by the woman who had stolen everything. Milani's vows were spoken with flawless performance. She spoke of love, of destiny, of building a future together. Her eyes sparkled with practiced sincerity, and the guests sighed in admiration. But I saw it. I saw the calculation in her gaze, the satisfaction of a predator securing her next prize. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed, petals floated through the air, and they kissed beneath the arch of roses. It should have been a moment of joy. Instead, it felt like the final nail sealing the coffin of the son I once knew. Later that night, after the cake had been cut and the first dances were done, I found her alone. The reception hall buzzed with music and laughter in the distance, but here, in a quiet corner near the tall windows, it was just the two of us. Milani stood with a glass of champagne in her hand, her reflection shimmering faintly in the glass pane, as if even the window couldn't look at her directly. I approached slowly, my heels tapping against the floor. She didn't startle. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she turned, that flawless smile still painted across her face. "Geneva," she said smoothly, as though we were simply two women admiring the view. "Enjoying the evening?" I held up a photograph, one Marcus had given me. Milani in another white dress, standing beside a hospital bed, her hand resting on the arm of a gaunt man whose face was barely recognizable from illness. Frank Morrison. Her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Then it returned, brighter than before. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" I asked, my voice low. "You married him, just like you married Trevor Collins, and Robert Martinez, and now my son." Milani's eyes sharpened, the warmth draining away, leaving behind something cold and metallic. She set her champagne glass down carefully, the clink against the table loud in the quiet space. "You've been busy." "I had to be," I replied, "because I won't let you destroy David the way you destroyed them." For a long moment, we simply stared at each other. No raised voices, no dramatic gestures. Just two women locked in a battle far deeper than appearances, one fighting for her son's life, the other fighting to keep her secrets buried. Finally, Milani laughed softly, the sound more chilling than comforting. "Do you really think he'll believe you? You showed him your papers, didn't you? And what happened? He doubted you, not me. Because that's what love is, Geneva. It blinds people. And right now, David loves me. That means you've already lost." Her words sliced through me, but I forced myself to stand tall. Love doesn't mean trust lasts forever, lies unravel, truth finds its way out. She leaned in closer, her perfume sharp, her voice a whisper meant only for me. "Maybe. But how much time do you have? You're sick, you're tired, you're running out of days. By the time you prove anything, I'll have everything I need, and your son will be mine completely." I swallowed hard, forcing back the wave of fear rising in my chest. "You underestimate me." "No," she said with eerie calm. "I don't underestimate you. That's why I've made sure David sees you as unstable. That's why, when you stand in front of him again, clutching your files and photographs, he'll hear only desperation, he'll see only weakness, and he'll choose me." The words landed like knives, and I realized she wasn't just confident, she was certain. She had already woven her story so tightly around my son that truth itself looked like madness. I wanted to strike back, to scream, to tear away the mask she wore so perfectly, but all I could do was hold her gaze, refusing to let her see me break. Because even if she believed I was powerless, even if she thought time and illness were on her side, I knew one thing: this was far from over. The music from the dance floor swelled again, muffled laughter carrying into the hallway. Milani picked up her glass, her smile returning as if nothing had passed between us. She walked back toward the celebration with the grace of a queen returning to her throne. I stood there in the shadows, clutching the photograph tighter, my hands trembling. This wasn't a wedding, it was a battlefield, and the war for my son had only just begun. It didn't happen all at once. Justice never does. It came in fragments: an email from Marcus, a knock at the door from a detective, a stack of subpoenas delivered in plain envelopes. The process was slow, deliberate, grinding like the gears of a machine that had long forgotten how to move with mercy. Marcus's evidence had finally reached the right hands. Financial records, marriage licenses, insurance payouts. One by one, the puzzle pieces clicked together into a portrait of something unmistakable: fraud, deception, a pattern of predation that could no longer be ignored. The first sign of change came when David called me late one night. His voice was shaky, hollow. "Mom, they froze our accounts. All of them." "Our accounts." The words twisted bitterly in my chest, but I said nothing. I listened as he stumbled through his confusion, as he repeated the same questions to himself. Why would they? How could they? And I knew. The foundation Milani had built beneath him was crumbling. The investigation grew louder, more invasive. Detectives interviewed neighbors, collected bank statements, pieced together testimonies from families of the men she had left behind. Names I'd only read in Marcus's reports were spoken aloud in police stations, each one carrying the weight of grief and betrayal. When the warrant finally came, I wasn't there to see it. I only watched it unfold later on the evening news. The screen showed her being led away in handcuffs, her perfect hair slightly mussed, her smile gone at last. Flashes from reporters' cameras lit her face, once so carefully curated, now exposed. It should have felt like victory. It should have been the climax of every sleepless night, every bus ride to chemotherapy, every moment I had stood in my living room clutching papers no one believed. I had fought for this moment. And yet, as I watched, all I felt was tired. David sat beside me, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at me, he didn't cry. He just stared at the screen, as though the woman he had loved, the woman he had defended against his own mother, had turned to smoke before his eyes. "They're saying she was married 6 times, he whispered. 6! His voice cracked. I didn't know, Mom." I reached for his hand, but it lay limp, cold. The damage was too deep. The arrests, the bank freezes, the damning evidence, none of it could repair the chasm she had carved between us. My victory had come at the cost of my son's trust, my son's innocence. Neighbors called me brave. Nurses at the clinic whispered encouragement. Even Marcus offered a quiet congratulations when the news broke. But none of it filled the hollow inside me. Because the truth is, there are no real winners in a story like this. Yes, Milani was unmasked. Yes, the law had caught up with her. But my son was broken, and I was left staring at the ruins of a family I no longer recognized. That night, after David retreated to his old room, I sat alone in the living room. The lamp cast a soft glow across the same table where the bank statements once lay, where my husband once sipped his morning coffee, where my son once spread his homework. I traced the wood grain with my fingers, as though the past might come back if I touched it softly enough. But it didn't. The house was silent. The wedding was over. The lies had been dragged into the light, and all I felt was exhaustion, heavy and absolute. Sometimes justice doesn't taste like triumph. Sometimes it tastes like ashes. The days that followed were quieter. The storm had passed, but silence carries its own kind of weight. The headlines faded, the phone calls slowed, and what remained was the long, tender process of putting one foot in front of the other. My health came first. Treatments stretched on, but one morning, Dr. Morrison walked into the room with a softer expression than I had ever seen on his face. The words "in remission" felt almost unreal, floating in the air like fragile glass. I clutched them carefully, afraid they might shatter if I held too tightly. For the first time in months, I breathed without the shadow of a ticking clock behind me. David stayed with me for a while, retreating from the life he thought he had built. He was quiet, carrying a grief that wasn't just about Milani, but about himself, about the trust he had misplaced, the choices he had made. Some nights, I found him sitting alone in the backyard, staring at the stars as though searching for answers written in the sky. We didn't talk much about her. There were no screaming arguments, no rehashing of details. Just silence, long and heavy, until eventually he whispered one night, "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't say I forgave him, not yet. Some wounds need time before they can even be touched. Instead, I placed my hand on his and let the quiet speak for me. Because forgiveness, I realized, is less about words and more about the slow rebuilding of trust, brick by fragile brick. Life found its rhythm again, though softer, slower. I planted herbs in the garden, their green shoots pushing through the soil like small promises of tomorrow. I joined a support group at the clinic, where laughter and tears mingled in equal measure, and where I no longer felt invisible. And every so often, when the house was still, I opened the drawer where I had once kept the bank statements. It was empty now, the papers long tucked away, but I ran my hand across the wood as if to remind myself, I survived. The image of Milani in handcuffs still drifted into my mind sometimes, but it no longer brought satisfaction. Only a reminder that evil can dress itself in silk and lace, that betrayal can smile as it cuts you, and that victory, when it comes, is rarely clean. And so, as the sun set one evening, I stood by the window, watching the sky fade into strokes of gold and violet. The world was quiet, almost tender, as if whispering that it was safe to rest at last. My story wasn't about triumph. It wasn't about revenge. It was about endurance, about finding the strength to keep breathing when the people you love most make it hardest to do so. And if you're still here, listening to every pause, every tremor in my voice, then I want to thank you. Because stories like mine are heavy to carry alone. So now, as the images blur, as the music softens, as my voice drifts into a whisper, I'll leave you with this. Cherish the people who stand with you when storms come, because they are rarer than diamonds. And if you've been betrayed, if someone has stolen from you, lied to you, or abandoned you, know this. Survival itself is its own quiet victory. Good night, my friends. And goodbye, for now.